Hello, everyone. So nice to be here in Zoom land with all of you. I'm here. We're going to deal with a very interesting poem tonight. And I have my chief disciple with me. Just want to show in case he's here in case I fall asleep while I'm speaking, right? You never know. So he may come up from time to time. So getting down to the business at hand. I'm going to be talking about a poem by Shitou Xiqian, which has many different ways of translating the title. It's often called The Inquiry into Matching Halves, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to thank everyone for coming, and of course I want to thank my teacher, my root teacher, Master Shengyan, who wrote this book, The Infinite Mirror, and which has a very long essay on this poem, which much of what I'm talking about comes from that, and I highly recommend the book if this poem interests you in looking further. It occurred to me that any given couplet in the poem, I could probably spend close to an hour on. Of course, I don't have that kind of time. So I just want you to know this is going to be a measured tour, if you will, but also kind of a whirlwind journey through the poem. One of the things that I want to emphasize in the talk is the usefulness of this poem, how helpful and important it can be for practice. In the Soto tradition, especially in Japanese tradition, they recite this poem daily. And it can be a little hard to see how it's so related to practice, as I'm going to try to show. But that's one of its key benefits and attributes. It's just that it speaks in a very poetic, seemingly abstract language, but it's really closer to home than we might think, and I hope all this will come out. So about a month ago in this group, I spoke on another poem by Shitou called The Song of the Grass Hut. And just a brief comparison, because the grass hut is attributed to Shitou Xiqian, as is this poem. And of course, it's 1,300 years ago, and who can be sure of who wrote it and what the circumstances were. But that poem is about pure, elevated practice. The grass hut at first seems to be practice itself, and then it extends to the whole universe. Yet the focus of the poem never really leaves the skin bag, that's this, and everything around us, all of us, the actual continuing material world that we seem to live in, that is continually changing, that we hold on to in a variety of ways. So that poem shows how we can't get lost in our practice in a certain way, and it comes back to the here and now. So this poem, The Inquiry into Matching Halves, is also about practice, but it's on a deeper level, if such a thing were possible. I don't even think that that kind of comparison is exactly valid, but it's a bundle of contradictions, because it's talking about non-duality and suchness and emptiness without using those words. The word Buddha is never mentioned in the poem. It's alluded to in the first line, of course, potentially. But I think it'll be really interesting when we go through this and see how it works. So one of the things in looking at these really elevated and highly touted poems is to think about why and how they were written. Because sometimes we just look at a poem like this and we sort of like put it right in front of us and start reading it without contextualizing it in our lives and in the practice. Sometimes it seems some of these poems were written by masters not in the way Western poems might be written, where you're in a transport of joy or have some kind of insight into life in particular. these poems may have been written, and of course, we're never going to be able to talk to Shitou to find out if I'm right or I'm wrong, to help particular students who are very advanced and are stuck on a certain level. So there's much in the poem that you can really look at and see how it resonates with your understanding and your practice. Practice is always insinuated and behind every line of the poem, but it doesn't quite come off that way. So I want to also talk a little bit about the history of the title of the poem, which is exceedingly important. And at some point, you're going to show the whole poem, right, Warren?
That's correct.
All right, but not quite. But so actually, if you can show the poem, because I have the Chinese and the English, and the talk is going to be geared to both, right? Okay. All right. I don't know if you can. There we go. Okay. So if you see, okay, you're not going to see my pointer, right? I don't think. Yeah. But
No.
yeah. But the first, right at the top of the page, there are three characters, and it's in Chinese. It's San Tung Chi, and I made a fanciful kind of translation of it, investigating how things are and aren't. And I also chose investigating duality, non-duality, and none of the above, and the Buddha birthright to discover. And I'll explain all that. This poem actually, the name of it was first used about 5 centuries before Shitou wrote it, in a Taoist poem of the with his exact same characters. And in that poem, it was translated as, let me see, the kinship of the three, a kinness of the three, triplex unity, the seal of the unity of three. And it's that work, it's not necessarily a poem, is about Chinese alchemy. And the author, who was Wei Boyang, around 220 CE, was writing about Taoist concepts and alchemy. And according to Shifu, there were instructions on how you could become a deity, right? Which is something that interests me. I would like to become Thor because I think his hammer is really neat. And to my great disappointment, I don't think I can become Spider-Man because he's really just a Marvel superhero. But this poem seems to have a certain resonance with what Shifu is writing in a totally Chan Buddhist sense. So the thing is that Taoists gave the Buddha, Shakyamuni, a name which was the perfectly enlightened highest deity. Because when Buddhism was first introduced into China, there was this difficulty of even having the language and the concepts to convey the teaching. So the idea that you could become a Taoist deity is translated, if you will, into Buddhist terms in that we have Buddha nature, we have Tathagata Garbha within us, and we have this potential to uncover the Buddhas that we already are. So it's understood in the teaching that this title, which is the first character, means to investigate, the second one means to put together, and the third one means kind of a contract. Actually, there's some indication it might have been like an indentured servant kind of contract. It's ripped apart, and then the 2 pages would be put together. So it's kind of like our true Buddha nature has been lost within all of our vexations. And we're trying to investigate and see how we are seeing, see how our minds work, so that we can recover our birthright. And in the Lotus Sutra, It says only a Buddha and a Buddha can understand these teachings. And of course, when you first read this, you say, well, that's ridiculous. Leave me out of it. I'm not a Buddha. But that's actually what it means. A Buddha and a Buddha means us and the Buddha. There is no difference, right? This is part of the teaching. It's not how we feel, of course. We have good days and bad days, and presumably those don't apply to an actualized Buddha. So the import of the topic of this poem is really quite profound. It's really investigating how we can uncover who we really are. And it's a little bit about duality and non-duality, right? But those are very esoteric types of concepts. And the danger in dealing with a poem like this is that you can get lost in the rhetoric, right? And all of a sudden you're talking about angels dancing on the head of a pin, when the way that I read the poem, it's really very, very useful and down to earth, despite how it's going to sound. So I thought what I'd first do is I would just read the whole poem, and so you just get a sense of it. And if you haven't seen this before, it's not going to make a lot of sense, I guess. But so let me and Warren, you'll just move it up as I read, right? Okay. So the mind of the great Indian sage intimately circles west to east. The roots of awakening may be sharp or dull, but the way has no northern or southern patriarch. I think Warren, can you mute everyone? I think I'm hearing some background noise. But the way has no northern or southern patriarch. The spiritual source brightens in clear light, branching and flowing in darkness, it pours forth. Grasping onto worldly affairs gives rise to delusion, but even according with principle alone is not awakening. All Dharma doors are at one with circumstances. Some Dharmas mutually engage, others do not. I just can't. Can you scroll up? Engagement increases involvement. Actually, you know, it's going to be too much. So let me just start going through the poem. I think it's going to be a lot easier because nobody's going to remember the whole poem when I read it. It's fairly long, and I'd like to go through it and make it make sense to people if possible. And of course, I hope there'll be time for questions and hopefully answers. So let's just begin at the beginning of the poem, the mind of the great sage, of the great Indian sage. First of all, when I read the poem, it took me a while to realize it was not talking about Shakyamuni. It was talking about his mind, and it may not even be Shakyamuni. It might be Bodhidharma that is referred to in the poem. And Master Xiqian makes the point that even trying to figure this out is a little bit like working on the koan of why did Bodhidharma come to the West. And that process itself is called San Tung Chi, just working with the line. Now, if you see this, this is really beyond our conceptual ability. First of all, few of us really know what a mind is, let alone how to transmit it. And, you know, we would think, what is it, somebody's writings? Is it something in a particular book somewhere? Is that what really constitute a mind that can be transmitted? And the mind that we're talking about here is a mind that is all encompassing, everything that we are experiencing and things that we don't experience. It's mind, as Shifu explains, only a fully enlightened person can really understand this line. And when I talk about fully enlightened people, I'm quoting Shifu. I'm not talking about my particular practice. I want to make that clear. And also, this translation that I did is a little bit of an experimental, and it's meant for teaching. So the next line says, east to west, I'm reading it literally, secretly, mutually commits or pays or something. So it's hard to understand how transmission, something that someone has and someone ostensibly doesn't have, can be transmitted one way mutually. It really doesn't compute. And that's why I use the word circles. And I really was toying with using the word oscillates, but that's utterly ridiculous. So that's, and also, this is giving the lineage authentication of what's about to come. Shitou wants you and me and everyone around to know that this teaching that he's giving, his words, are not something that he has cooked up. This is coming from the mind of the great Indian sage, and that mind is being alluded to, pointed to in his teachings. And the west to the east refers, of course, to Bodhidharma coming from India to China. There's another meaning. There's also kind of a political nationalistic thing that sometimes hovers around a poem. China in the 8th century was a pretty isolated country. I don't know how the man or woman on the street would actually know that there was in India. So it was quite an innovative thing. And in Chinese culture, things outside of China tend to be looked at as the work of barbarians. So this is setting the reader up to know that something new is coming and that you have to have an open mind to really understand it and try to look into it. And also, so it makes me think of the line from Thich Nhat Hanh. He often says, when I take refuge in Buddha, Buddha takes refuge in me. Once again, it's hard perhaps to understand, but this kind of intimacy is what's posited here. Now, every line in this poem can have different interpretations. I happen to have asked Jimmy Yu about this yesterday. I was sitting in on a class of his, and he said that that middle character in the second line, which is me, was really about simply expressing that things are not widely known, that there's a transmission, but some people sort of missed it. It can also be understood in a more esoteric way. But anyway, this is the introduction. Now, next, the roots, well, it's literally people's roots have sharp and dull. And when we talk about sharp or dull roots, we're really talking about karma and about what one has done or hasn't done in either a wholesome or an unwholesome way, setting up one's mind state to be either very receptive or less receptive to the teachings. Shifu makes a really good point in the book that not only is there sharp or dull, which is important, but there's also a karmic affinity. So someone can have very sharp roots. That means that they learn how to meditate and they learn it really well very quickly, and they can have some very profound experiences. But if they don't have a close affinity with the teaching, then they can easily fall away from the practice. They can get bored. They can be caught up in wishing to have the same kind of experience that they had earlier. And that can be a formula for disaster or falling out of the practice. Part of the reason that Shitou is introducing this is not, I believe, for you to try to consult someone and find out whether you have sharp or dull roots. It's kind of saying that everything is okay. Whatever it is, it's your persistence and your faith that really will be most instrumental in your practice. Further along these lines of pushing away extremities and associations with a variety of things comes the line, but the way has no northern or southern patriarch. And as some of you might know, in the Chan school, there was a northern school which was associated with a gradual practice, and a southern school that was associated with a more sudden practice. Once again, if a Buddhist scholar of the period were here, I'm sure there's more nuances than that, but this is referred to in the poem, and basically to assuage someone who might be worried about, wow, am I really following the right teacher? Is this really going the way that I really would like it to go? There are a variety of things like that that could come to be obstructions in one's practice. So Shitou is saying that, forget about that. Let me go down to here. All right, now the next line. Now he's starting to hone in on what we're really looking on. So the first 4 lines were,
I'm going to leave this.
what? I'm sorry? I didn't hear.
Yeah, I think it's just a blur. Go ahead, Harry.
Okay. All right. So the spiritual source brightens in clear light. Let me sort of get you prepared for the flexibility and the almost impossibility of pinning down terms that you're going to be encountering in this poem. So this character means spiritual and it means source. That's a pretty literal translation. That could be understood as Buddha nature, but Shitou could have said that. So I don't think he really wants to identify things in a particular way. But there's this deep force or whatever that is inside of us, inside of everything, and it will show itself and brighten as you encounter it. That's one sort of understanding. And throughout the poem, we're going to have this issue of darkness and brightness. And different interpretations will take one as representative of enlightenment and realization, the other as delusion and ignorance. And those two things can be turned around. So I'm just giving everybody a warning. Once again, this is sort of represented by Zach, who represents both darkness and brightness. So I want you to know that his presence here is not without justification. All right, getting back to the poem. So, and then branching and flowing in darkness, it pours forth. So even if you aren't aware of this kind of thing, if you're not aware of Buddha nature, aware of suffering, if you will, this spiritual source is still flowing. Now the poet is talking about issues that we have in the world, about really where our suffering comes from. And since we're trying to emerge from that, this is really very relevant. So the first thing is really about mostly ordinary sentient beings who are not practicing. And even practicing sentient beings can certainly fall into this trap of grasping onto worldly affairs, thinking that getting the latest Nintendo or having not just 2 streaming services, but 4 or 5 is really what will make you happy. And of course, impermanence will squash everything. So grasping onto worldly affairs gives rise to delusion. You become a legend in your own mind, as Clint Eastwood would say. Then there's the other extreme, and the poem is showing extremes and the lack of the validity of seeing the extremes as extremes in a certain way. So according with principle, and we'll talk about principle a little bit more, is really about trying to remove yourself from the world, to only practice, to only study Dharma, and to push things that seem to interfere with your practice away. And even though doing that, you could achieve a certain level of what we call one mind or some level of samadhi, but it wouldn't really be awakening. It still would be, you'd still be caught in delusion of a different type. And then here's a very interesting line, which is, all Dharma doors are at one with circumstances. That's how I translated it. And it's not like I'm totally happy with everything I've translated. Another way of looking at what a Dharma door could be is your sense organs. So the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And the character at the end is realms or objects. So your sense organs, your experience is in encountering everything, whether you know it or not. And there is a sutta from the Pali Canon called the All, where someone asks the Buddha, what is the All? I mean, what is everything that there is? And the Buddha says, the All is the eye and what is seen, the ear and what is heard, the nose and what is smelled, and taste, the tongue and what is tasted, and the body and what is felt. That's the entirety of our experience. So Shitou is giving notice to the way we're experiencing the world through our senses, or just that every Dharma door is connected to every other Dharma door, which is, and let me just define Dharma for some. It's not always that easy, but in the Lankavatara Sutra it says a Dharma is anything that you can imagine, and that includes things that you're seeing right in front of you, which then go into your mind and sort of become part of your the projections of your mind. And there are also non-dharmas, which are things in your mind that really didn't come there because of causes and conditions, like flying hippopotamuses. Those are, I mean, unless anyone happens to have seen them, those are non-dharmas. Some dharmas mutually engage, others do not. Once again, this is something, it sounds quite abstract, but imagine if you're looking for a parking space and you're trying to park between 2 cars, and, well, those cars are right there. You have to really engage with them, if you will, and perhaps someone is sitting in one of the cars getting ready to move, but there are cars 10 cars away or cars across the street, which are also dharmas, but at least for the moment, you're not engaging with them. That's one way of understanding that line. So, but when you do engage, and the engagement here means engagement with your deluded mind, right? You're not just acting in the moment according to what the circumstances dictate. This is more, how come I can't find a parking space? It's not fair. The world is against me. I think that's what this engagement is really pointing at. All right, Warren, can you go to the next section? All right, and I put, yet isolation in place leads nowhere. It's not bad as a translation, but this is referring to a fairly sophisticated teaching of the Dharma position of things, which means that things really exist, right? Shifu in the book says, you know, the chair I'm sitting in and the chair you're sitting in, right? If you're sitting in a chair, didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, it's not just a product of my mind, but we tend to isolate things in time or space. So when you talk about dharmic position, it just means that things are evolving according to causes and conditions, right? That there is a reason for things to be the way they are. Hold on one second. I'm just trying to get to another part. Here we go. Okay. So this is also, and once again, you know, as I'm reading this, I see how sort of abstract it seems to be. You know, you really can't hide that, but what is being pointed to, I think, is really quite important. So the next line says, the basis of form is particularized in substance and appearance. And this one I translated very carefully, because one of the things that Shifu talks about in the book, and it's very important in our practice in this poem, is about what the word nature means. Nature can be the characteristics of things. For example, water is wet, water flows. That's a characteristic. But nature also can mean self-nature, which is a key word for emptiness, that things are a product of causes and conditions, so they're not what we think they are. So this line about the basis of form, I take it to mean things as they really are, as seen perhaps by a fully enlightened person or a Buddha. But what we do is we particularize things in substance and appearance. So I like this movie, I don't like that movie. You know, this is the kind of tea I like, that's not the kind of tea I like. We're really caught up in the particulars of things, and things have particulars. That's something that the poem is really going to emphasize. The issue comes when we get caught up in them. All right, and the same thing with primal sound. There is both light and sound that one can experience at the dawning of a very, very high level of meditative experience. It's often actually in Indian literature, it's called the sound that is not produced by two things vibrating together, which is the way that almost every sound that we hear is produced. But once again, and Shunryu Suzuki makes a distinction between noise and sound. So anything that we hear and we accept and comes into our experience and is, we're really one with it, that's a sound. But when we react to things, you know, I don't like the way this particular announcer on the radio talks, or that trombone is too loud or too soft or whatever. The way he explains it, that's noise. So these two lines are basically saying there is the world as it really is, which few of us experience, and we make it into something that it isn't. Now we're getting into the part where the poem starts talking about darkness and clarity, and about what we really can perceive and what goes on beyond our perception. Remember, the Buddha said to Ananda, where there is perception, there is deception. So we tend to hold on to things according to the way that we see them. And even, I noticed this just going through this poem. Most people, really want to understand it or whatever. And so you start to get a kind of understanding. And then when that gets broken down for whatever reason, it's hard to let go of what you were holding on to before. So that's why this is a very good line coming here. Darkness, and remember, darkness is distinguished from light, in a sense, only in our minds, because you can't have darkness without light. You can't have light without darkness. As Shitou says in his book, if you're in a room with no lights, everything looks dark to you, but that's not the whole world. There's light outside. And if you walk out into the light and there are no shadows, that's only a temporary thing. So, and people so easily associate lightness, enlightenment with realization. And that's just a word. Once again, what this poem is showing ultimately is all the words that it uses are just words, and it's all expedient means. But the poem gives us an opportunity to look at this in a deeper way than we might if we were just left to our own devices. So high and middling teachings could be the Mahayana, could be the Theravadan, could be some Pratyeka Buddha that's hanging around. The darkness, the teachings that you can't see but are operative are going to permeate through any kind of words. No word, no discussion is going to dispel what the teachings are about and the way the world actually is. And then by the same token, clarity shines through the shrouds of words. It's literally muddiness of words. So even if something is misspoken or said in a particular highfalutin way or a fairly rugged street word kind of way, it's still comprehensible with the right causes and conditions. So the four elements return to their own nature. The four elements for many years gave me a lot of problems because I have such a literal mind. I thought that if there's an earth element, it's like a chemical compound and there should be soil in everything that's solid, which is not what it means. It really is talking about the states of matter, if you will, of solid, liquid, and gaseous, and also energy. It's one way of looking at it. Also, what's obscure about this particular line is what nature means. Nature, in this case, means emptiness, that even the four elements, beyond, even simpler than the building blocks of chemistry, if you will, just four elements, even those are empty and not what they seem. And it says, they return as a child returns to its mother. You can't have a child without a mother. You can't have a mother without a child. Those descriptions are codependent. And what Shitou says time and time again is that existence and emptiness are one and the same. Emptiness comes out of existence. Existence comes out of emptiness. And one other thing, so many of you know in the Heart Sutra where it says form is not other than emptiness, emptiness not other than form. In his book, There Is No Suffering, which is about the Heart Sutra, Shitou points out that the part that emptiness is not other than form is much more important, because that's about our creativity. And whereas if you look at everything as empty, that's a good formula for just giving up. Okay, so then the next part of the poem says, the burn of fire, the shake of wind, the wet of water, the solidity of earth, sights for eyes, sounds for ears, fragrance for nose, salt, sour for tongue. You want to go a little further, Warren? All right, so those things that were up above, right, which were basically the four elements and also all of our sense organs, right, and how we react to organ and object. This line, thus each Dharma interplays with all Dharmas, it's showing how everything is interconnected. And once again, that teaching is to wean you off your grasping after your mind's projections, which is what we tend to do. If you see that everything is connected like this, when one particular thing happens, either happily or sadly, you can see how it relates to the whole world, and you cannot get caught up in it. And so then from roots, leaves spread and scatter. Root and branch must return to original principle. This is saying much the same thing. The root, Master Xiqian says, means emptiness, and leaves spread, and leaves are the apparent world that we're in. It's supported by and one and the same as the world of emptiness. Also, one thing that's tricky in this poem is about getting caught up in the metaphors. So a leaf, whether it's on the tree or spreading through the wind, is just as empty as the root of the tree. There's really no difference. So this is used as a metaphor to show a particular relationship. It's not really a picture of reality. And that's sort of what it says in the next line. Root and branch must return to original principle. So I hope everyone is, I know this is, let's see, how long have I gone on? All right, I'm going to go through the poem. It's, you know, we could stop just for a moment and just see if anyone has any questions so far. I mean, as wonderful as I love to hear myself talk, I'd much rather hear other people. So Warren, why don't you just take it down for a second? We'll just come back, because I think it's a really long ordeal. Ah, there we go. Okay, you hardy souls who are still here. Just want to see if anyone has any comments or questions before I go on. And we'll do this at the end also, but I just thought I'd give you a break from staring at that screen.
No, this is good, Harry. I'm
Yeah.
also pinging the YouTube live too to see if they have any questions or comments.
Oh, okay.
And just FYI for folks on Zoom, I think I put it in chat the PDF of the poem, right? And just so you have it for reference.
Oh, great. That'll make it a little easier. Okay. I took, this would be a good time for me to do a commercial, right? But I don't have a product to sell yet. So we can go back there. You can put the poem back up.
Here we go.
All right, so I wanted to say something about principle. And at the end of this, I'd be really curious to see if anyone has any feelings about it, because it's kind of tricky. There is this word, the third sentence down, that last character is a word that can be translated as principle, which is zong, which can mean ancestor, and can mean teaching, can mean a lot of things. And there's another character which we will run into a little bit later, which is li, which also can be translated as principle. And Chinese is very tricky. Sometimes one character, like xin for mind, can mean many different things. Things can be interpreted differently. And other times, very different characters can mean much the same thing. And what I think is pretty interesting, which I started to ask myself today, is that it could have said root and branch must return to original emptiness, but it didn't. Actually, the word emptiness is not used in this poem. And I think that principle, and I'm dealing with this in studying the Lotus Sutra, means really non-attachment, but non-attachment beyond the words that I just used. It's really kind of the experience of emptiness, where understanding and non-understanding are linked. And I think the reason that the word principle exists is because it's part of practice. It has something to do with being a human being. That it's not, there's kind of this intermediary idea, because as many of you may know, the word emptiness, which simply means that things aren't the way we describe them, that they're conditioned, they're not something that we have to attach to. It is often a very jejune, empty, dreary, kind of lifeless proposition. So it seems. It actually isn't. I think when you see more of the emptiness of things, the world actually expands and brightens and you're more involved in it. But just the sound of it and the way people kind of understand it is sometimes problematic. And this has resulted in the schools of Tathagata and Yogacara, which try to put a different spin on the way we understand principle, if you will. So anyway, so I'm just saying that, so that's what it means. Root and branch must return to original principle. It means return to emptiness, but in a way that we are aware. And so high and low express accordingly. It's literally exalted and base use their language, their words. And I think this is perhaps looking at this from another angle of the people who are speaking and who are debating and dealing with the practice. There are going to be all sorts of different arguments and opinions. And the idea is not to be put off by it. Just a quick Zen anecdote of the Zen master who is walking through the monastery and finds two of his disciples arguing vehemently. He listens to one carefully, and then and he says to that person, "You are right." And then the second one says, "Well, wait a second, X, Y, and Z or so." And the master says to him, "You are right." And the first student says to the master, "We can't both be right." And the master says, "You are right." I think that that's what's expressed in this line, high and low express accordingly, not to get caught up, but to see the principle revolving through everything. You know, the idea of the mind ground is to be able to see emptiness in everything, which is what continuous practice is about, which is what some of us most of us are trying to do. So there then, once again, honing down on this, the way we attach to words is, I think, is sort of what's behind what's going on here. There is dark and light. Now, what I did here, as somebody who knows this poem, this is a mistranslation, if you will. And I said I'm using this for teaching purposes, but it says, it literally says, but don't take the dark and encounter it as dark. Really, don't look at the dark as dark. And I'm using darkness as confusion in this particular way. So my metaphor is you're meditating quite well, and then you have a period where you're quite distracted and your mind is jumping all over the place, and then you feel confused, right? So that interruption of your seemingly solid practice with discord and a disarrayed mind, that you might take that as darkness, but here it's saying not. And this line, by the way, as I said, these two lines can be interpreted in many different ways. And so the same thing as there is light and dark, you're sitting fairly miserably, and then for a certain period of time, I don't know how long, your mind is crystal clear, not a thought to be seen anywhere, and you say, wow, I must be very close to enlightened, if not entirely enlightened. There's many ways of interpreting these lines. And so then it's really giving you a deeper understanding of the interplay of things. So you're not caught up in the ups and downs of life. So this is, as I said, even though it seems very abstract, it's really quite practical. Light and dark appear in opposition. And that's what it says literally. They mutually oppose. But it's giving you a slightly different understanding of what opposition means. It's not the kind of opposition that is canceling one another out. It's the kind of opposition that's two sides of the same coin. It's actually making the truth of reality with all of its beauty and ugliness. And so it's using, as this step follows the last, if you can't walk unless you move one foot in front of the other. So the ending step is really not something you can forget about, because it's going to become a beginning step very shortly. And so this is also the next line, all things function in their own particular way. This is really very, very important. Let me see if I can find what Suzuki Roshi said about this. Well, I remember. Basically, he said that we need the darkness of meditation to see this interplay. So we understand that everyone is exactly who they are, utterly different from anyone else, even if there are enormous amounts of similarities. Everyone is totally different, yet we're all part of the same world. And the reality of the real world is contradictory. There is relativity, and there's quantum theory. There's a somewhat bogus way of explaining absolute and relative, that what we see, like trees and park benches and streets, they're all made up out of atoms and molecules. So, in one sense, you could see beyond your depiction of the things that you're encountering. Of course, the atoms and the molecules are also part of samsara, but we have to start somewhere. So even though, so everything is really, really unique. And this is a really important thing because so many of us feel left out in life. We feel that there are people who are smarter and richer and stronger and better situated than we are. And of course, we can also look at people who are in worse circumstances and get a sense of superiority. But all of those kind of interactions, as it said earlier in the poem, engagement causes delusion. All of those are very short-sighted. And the poem is pointing this out. And once again, it's not, in the way I look at it, just an idle intellectual kind of notation. It's a really important thing that will or could filter through one's life. So you basically look at your life and everyone else quite differently. If you can see each Dharma interplaying with all other Dharmas, everything connected, no opposition, no resistance between things except in our minds and the way that we deal with things. So, from we got to go to the next page, I think. Okay. Actually, I'm glad I got back to that. That was I was able to add a little bit more. So, here we go. Unfolding in word, use, and place. So things are unique, and everything has a dharmic position, as I said. In Dogen Zenji talks about wood turning into ash, and of course ash is not going to turn back into wood. But then he says, don't think before or after when you think of wood and ash, which is very counterintuitive, right? You have wood and it turns into ash. But what he says that each has its own dharmic position. And this is coming once again from a mind that is seeing through the concepts that we usually use and the way that we orient ourselves in the world. So now he's talking once again, giving these once again fairly abstract kind of observations, if you will, but they're really important. So phenomena cooperate like a box and lid. So if your lamp falls down and crashes into your TV and that falls on the floor and scares your cat, that is all transpiring as causes and conditions playing out. It goes against what we would want, and it can be startling. But phenomena are all juxtaposed exactly as they are, according to causes and conditions. So it's everything is transpiring the way that it is. This is really hard to hear, right? It sounds ridiculous. So there's an anecdote from Shobo Genzo where a Chan master is approached by a student, and the student says to the Chan master, "What should we do when we're confronted by the hundreds and thousands and myriads of objects?" He says. And what this means, my teacher explained to me, is that's called your life. Everything coming at you, it's when we're really frustrated and upset, then it seems like that, but this is what's happening. Every moment is unfolding according to a myriad of causes and conditions. And what the master says is don't try to control them, which is also something that sounds fairly ridiculous, because one of the things that we really want when we're pushing things away and trying to draw things to us is to control them. And then Dogen goes on to comment on this, is that actually objects are not coming towards you. It's always dharmas are coming at you. So you can see everything unfolding in a natural way, even if it feels very unnatural. And I think what that don't control things means, it doesn't mean be passive in the least. It means to be totally open to what's happening in this moment so that you are more adaptable, more flexible. You have more creative options open to you in the next moment. So that's phenomenon. Now, principle is the underlying way the world works, which is something that would not really be of that much interest to someone who wasn't a practitioner, and which is quite natural and available to someone who has seen their nature, has really understood all of the things that we're talking about in this poem. So they can see that principle is never being varied from. That's the idea of the arrow hitting its mark. Once again, there are many different translations of this. And then emptiness doesn't go away just because we don't like it. It's always there, and it's always operative, and we're not always in accord with it. And so now we get to the part of the poem, it's kind of the exhortation, if you will, where it says, take up these words, you must encounter the original principle. And so Shitou he's actually talking about practice, and he's talking to his disciples, people in the monastery, one says. But once again, he hasn't mentioned a word about meditation. He's talking about what you're holding on to, what you're not seeing. That's why this poem is so amazing, really. And then don't set up your own rules and standards. It's very easy for people to get caught in, this is working, that's not working. I read something where someone said you should do this, and I'm doing this, and I'm going to ignore a lot of other things. I'm going to just create my own world and push everything out. So that's, I guess, fairly clear. And then see with eyes only, and the way eludes you. So this is harking back to this principle and phenomena. So if you're in with your eyes only, and you're not mindful in the deepest sense of the word, really remembering your practice, then you won't really be on a path to your own realization. And if you walk only with your feet and you're not paying attention to where you're going, how will you know the path, and how will you avoid walking into a tree? It doesn't say that. And once again, in terms of encouragement, if you will, which is really what the poem is trying to do, progress is not measured by near or far. There's a phrase that you could take and meditate on for quite a while, because we usually look at ourselves in terms of near and far. How close am I? How good is my practice? How bad is my practice? Why are other people practicing so much better than I am? I'm so far away. You could go on and on with this, how you can get caught up in this, in these metrics. And then with that kind of attitude, mountains and rivers of confusion will block you. And that character, me, for confusion also means the other poisons. It's not only ignorance, but it's greed, hatred, envy, and conceit. All of those will block you. You will think you have to drink the poison, if you will, live in that world, and you won't make progress. And then finally, show the end, Warren, please. Right to the end of the poem. No, there's still some left. The last line of the poem was blocked. Can you show the bottom of the poem?
I see. Here we go. Can you all see?
Yes, there we go. All right, so mountains and rivers and confusion will block you. I put the unless in there, but unless you who investigate this mystery sincerely listen, so he's saying, I sincerely say to you, literally, in light or darkness, don't squander your deliverance. All of the things brought up in the poem are what Shitou was telling us we should investigate to, to move forward in our situations, and not, I think implicit in this is to not continually judge ourselves. Everything in the poem is really about non-judgment. If you look at it, seeing how things are transpiring, how we are unique, but we're part of the world, and the world is unique, but it's part of us. All of these seemingly logically contradictory things are only seemingly logically contradictory in our minds. Did you follow that? Every word. Okay, so I do need some authentication from a non-sentient being. Okay, so we can put the poem down, and if anyone has any comments, questions, please.